Welcome, dear listeners, to another spine-chilling tale from Nicole's Nightmare Narratives, where the ordinary turns into the extraordinary and the familiar becomes the frightening. Tonight, we delve into the story of Mia, a young woman with a love for vintage fashion who stumbles upon a dress that holds more than just memories of the past. Sit back, turn off the lights, and let the darkness envelop you as we explore the doppelganger reflections of terror. On a sunny afternoon, Mia, a young woman in her early 20s with a passion for vintage fashion, stepped into a quaint little vintage clothing store. This charming store was nestled on a quiet street, away from the hustle and bustle of the city. The air inside was filled with the distinct scent of aged fabrics and polished wood, creating an ambience that was both nostalgic and serene. As Mia wandered through the aisles, her eyes flitted over the array of beautiful, old-fashioned garments. She hummed a soft tune to herself, her fingers grazing the delicate fabrics as she moved. The store was a treasure trove of vintage elegance, and Mia felt a thrill of excitement at the thought of discovering a hidden gem. Her gaze fell upon a black dress adorned with a high lace collar. It was elegant and striking, a stark contrast to the other items in the store. The dress seemed to call out to her, its intricate lacework and classic design capturing her imagination. With a smile, Mia reached for the dress and held it up to the light, admiring its beauty. "Excuse me," Mia said, looking around for the shop owner. "Can I try this on?" From behind a display of antique hats, Mrs. Coffin, the elderly shop owner, emerged. Her warm, kind eyes twinkled beneath her silver curls as she approached Mia. "Of course, dear," Mrs. Coffin replied with a welcoming smile. "It looks like it was made for you." Mia thanked her and headed to the fitting room, her excitement barely contained. She slipped into the dress and was struck by how perfectly it fit her. The lace collar was soft against her neck, and the dress itself flowed gracefully around her. Standing in front of the mirror, Mia admired her reflection. However, as she gazed at herself, she couldn't shake the feeling that something was amiss. "This is perfect," Mia murmured to herself, trying to ignore the uneasy sensation creeping up her spine. But as she continued to stare at her reflection, she noticed something strange. Her reflection's expression seemed to change, a slow, malicious grin spreading across its face. This grin was not mirrored by Mia's own face, and it sent a shiver down her spine. "Hello," Mia whispered, her voice trembling as she stared at the reflection. The reflection's grin widened, and it winked at her with a cold, unsettling confidence. Panic surged through Mia as she quickly pulled the dress off, her hands trembling as she discarded it on the floor. She rushed out of the fitting room, her breath coming in short, ragged gasps. Mrs. Coffin looked at her with a hint of curiosity. I changed my mind," Mia stammered. "A pity," Mrs. Coffin replied with a sad smile. "It looked lovely on you." Mia nodded absently and hurried out of the store, the eerie feeling clinging to her like a shadow. That night, Mia lay in bed, but sleep eluded her. The image of her reflection's sinister smile haunted her thoughts. She tossed and turned, unable to shake the feeling of dread that had settled over her. Eventually, she gave in to her curiosity and took the black dress out of her closet. She laid it across her bed and stared at it, the lace collar seeming to writhe slightly in the dim light of her room. She tried to convince herself that it was merely a trick of the light, but the unsettling sensation persisted. "It was just a trick of the light," Mia whispered to herself, trying to dispel her fear. Despite her better judgment, she found herself drawn to the dress. With trembling hands, she slipped it on once more, feeling the fabric embrace her like a cold, ghostly touch. She faced the mirror again, her heart pounding in her chest. As she looked at her reflection, the eyes staring back at her were cold and emotionless, devoid of the warmth she had seen before. The reflection's hand reached out, its fingers impossibly thin and pale. "What's happening?" Mia's voice quivered as she spoke to her own reflection. Her heart raced as the reflection's hand pressed against the glass, trying to break through the barrier between them. A sudden, blood-curdling scream erupted from behind her, causing her to spin around in terror. But the room was empty, the source of the scream an elusive mystery. The next day, Mia met her friend Chloe at a local coffee shop. Chloe, a friend who had always been a source of comfort, noticed the dark circles under Mia's eyes and the look of fear that seemed to shadow her every move. "There's something wrong with the dress, Chloe," Mia said, her voice barely above a whisper. "My reflection. It's not me." Chloe's brow furrowed as she listened to Mia's anxious words. "Mia, you're exhausted. Maybe you should take a break." "No, you don't understand," Mia insisted, her eyes wide with fear. "It's evil." Chloe sighed, her concern growing. "Mia, you're imagining things. You need to get some rest." Mia shook her head, unable to convey the depth of her fear. The conversation ended there, but the dread continued to fester within her. That night, Mia lay in bed, her mind racing. She couldn't escape the image of her grinning reflection, and the fear gnawed at her. She eventually fell into a restless sleep, only to be woken by a faint rustling sound coming from the corner of her room. "Who's there?" Mia whispered, her heart pounding. From the shadows emerged a figure clad in the black dress. As it stepped into the moonlight, Mia's breath caught in her throat. The figure was her exact double, but its face was twisted into a grotesque, mocking smile. "Going somewhere?" the doppelganger asked, its voice a rasping, distorted version of Mia's own. Mia's scream pierced the silence of the night, echoing through the dark apartment. The doppelganger's eyes gleamed with malicious intent as it advanced towards her, its presence a living nightmare. The next day, Chloe wandered through a deserted alley, her sense of unease growing with each step. She had been trying to reach Mia all morning, but her calls had gone unanswered. "Mia, where are you?" Chloe called out, her voice echoing off the walls of the empty alley. As she rounded a corner, she came face to face with Mia's doppelganger. The black dress was stained with a dark, ominous substance, and the smile on the doppelganger's face was a twisted mockery of Mia's own. Chloe's scream was swallowed by the alley as the doppelganger reached out, its cold fingers closing around her wrist. The terror in her eyes was met with the doppelganger's cold, unfeeling gaze. Back in Mia's apartment, the real Mia stumbled out of the closet, her eyes wide with terror. She looked around the room, her breaths coming in short, desperate gasps. The dress lay discarded on the floor, a dark stain marring its fabric. On the bed, Chloe's phone lay abandoned, a grim reminder of what had happened. A sickening realization dawned on Mia as she picked up the phone. The doppelganger had not only replaced her in the mirror, but had also taken her place in the real world. Chloe was lost to the darkness, and Mia was left alone in a world where her reflection had become her worst enemy. Days turned into weeks, and Mia's disappearance became a topic of local gossip. Friends and family searched tirelessly for any sign of her, but she had vanished without a trace. The vintage clothing store remained a quiet, unassuming place, its secrets hidden behind its charming facade. One evening, a young woman named Sarah walked into the store. She was new to town and had heard about the store's unique collection of vintage clothing. As she browsed the racks, her eyes fell upon the black dress with the high lace collar. "Excuse me," Sarah called out to Mrs. Coffin, who was arranging some clothes nearby. "Can I try this on?" Mrs. Coffin looked up from her work and smiled warmly. "Of course, dear. It looks like it was made for you." Sarah took the dress and headed to the fitting room. As she slipped it on, she admired her reflection in the mirror. However, as she turned to look at the back of the dress, she noticed something disturbing. Her reflection's smile was not her own. It was a cruel, knowing grin. "Hello?" Sarah whispered, her voice trembling as she tried to understand what she was seeing. Her reflection's grin widened into a malevolent smirk, and the doppelganger stepped out of the mirror, its cold eyes locking onto Sarah. The room seemed to grow colder as the doppelganger reached out with its thin, pale fingers. "You're mine now," it whispered, in a voice that was a chilling echo of Sarah's own. Sarah's scream echoed through the store, but the sound was lost in the emptiness of the night. Mrs. Coffin continued to arrange the clothes, a satisfied smile on her face as she prepared for the next victim. As days turned into weeks, Sarah's friends and family searched for her, but she had vanished without a trace. The vintage clothing store remained a quiet, unassuming place, its secrets hidden behind its charming facade. The doppelganger continued its dark work, moving from victim to victim, always searching for the next soul to ensnare. A new customer, drawn by the store's allure, would eventually step into the shop, unaware of the darkness that awaited them. And so the cycle continued, with the sinister power of the doppelganger's dress lingering in the shadows, ever eager for its next chance to spread terror. And so the cycle continues, as the sinister power of the doppelganger's dress lingers in the shadows, waiting for its next unsuspecting wearer. Thank you for joining us on this journey into darkness with Nicole's Nightmare Narratives. If you enjoyed this tale of terror, be sure to like, share, and subscribe for more chilling stories that will keep you up at night. Until next time, remember to keep your reflections in check and always be wary of what lies beyond the mirror. Good night, and sleep well if you can.